Okay, I think I'm gonna get started, and we'll let people join in as I talk. My part is not as important. Hopefully, by the time I'm done introducing the webinar, we'll be able to we'll have more people in the discussion. And this will be great. We're very excited. So to start, my name is Eugenia. I'm the Public Engagement Coordinator with the Ontario Council for International Cooperation, OCIC, and I'm very excited, grateful that we had so much interest in this webinar. We've been wanting to do something like this for a while now, and I'm happy to see that there is real interest in this topic and this sort of discussion. And we're happy to be opening up space today to be talking about youth and youth engagement, and particularly youth engagement in policy and advocacy spaces. So we're super happy that we've gotten Larissa to do this with us. So thanks, Larissa. I'll be introducing Larissa in a little bit, and you'll hear more about her. Before we get going, though, I'd like to acknowledge that OCIC operates in the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Métis, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. We are grateful to be able to share this land, the water, the resources, and offer our gratitude for our First Nations for their care of and teachings about our earth and our relations. And in the spirit of the dish with one spoon, which is the agreement to share these resources in a peaceful and in a good way, we're offering this webinar today for free in the hopes that this will hopefully inspire many more youth, many more people to get involved. And if you're already involved, to keep doing what you're doing, and hopefully pack you with more tools and more ways to engage in a more effective way. So for those of you that might not know OCIC, we're a network of about 200 Ontario-based civil society organizations, which are NGOs, non-government organizations, institutions, and people. And we're all working together towards global social justice and sustainable development. So for those of you in the sector, that's better explained through the Sustainable Development Goals. So as you might know, we're working in all sorts of ways, and through gender equality, climate change, and partnerships towards sustainable cities and communities in all these types of ways. And OCIC helps to support that network of people and organizations doing great work towards sustainable development. Now, youth engagement is important, and I promise I'll shut up after this and I'll pass the mic to Larissa. But we truly believe that youth, and particularly Canadian youth, people in Ontario that are working in this way, are at the helm of the change that's happening, particularly around climate, around gender, around these things that I think are important to all of us. And engaging youth and supporting youth leaders in doing this work has been very important to OCIC for a number of years. And this is why we have a program called the Global Changemakers program, which some of you in the network might know. And actually, I see some of you logged in today. So hello, if you have been or are in the Global Changemaker network, it's great to see you. To see you come back every time, and I will just suggest and hope that if some of you are out there, to introduce yourself in the chat, and just to say that we have resource people. The whole point of this network is to share with each other, share expertise. So we have some of those people here. You'll be able to find more information on that on our website. The other piece that makes this webinar so timely as well is that perhaps for some of you that have seen some notices come out from us, we've been sharing a lot of opportunities in relation to policy spaces. For example, we just wrapped up a call to the Women Deliver youth delegation, for example, and so we're very happy to be able to offer those opportunities, but a lot of the times we hear from people that perhaps they might not feel so confident in their experiences and their abilities and in their skill sets to apply for these things, and that's terribly sad for us. And we want to make sure that youth are accessing these opportunities that are available. We want to see a lot of applications from people from all walks of life. So I hope that this webinar can be a way that you'll feel that you'll leave in much more confident and having the tools to apply to these types of things in a way that you're comfortable doing that. So that's it on OCIC and the importance of this webinar to us. I'm going to pass the mic to Larissa very soon, but before I do, I just want to say again how grateful we are. We're super excited to be working with a young leader like Larissa, and she's been on our radar for a really long time. And the first time that we met with her was, at least myself, was through I Am, one of our e-magazines that you can find on our website, and I'll put the link on there because she was a contributor this year and spoke about intersectionality in her work by presenting her red path skirt, which we can talk about another day, but I think some of the pieces that were important from that talk and from what we heard from her during that time was the way in which we foster relationships with each other. So I think we're going to get a little bit of that in this webinar, but again, I'll put a link to her fantastic work so you can read more about it. And we are also grateful that she was able to produce a manual for this particular session. So you're getting not just the online discussion, but also a tool that you can take with you and review after this. So that's it from me. Larissa, take it away.
Beautiful. Thank you for such a beautiful introduction. Wow. Okay. So merci, bonsoir, Larissa Crawford de Changemakers, Calgary, puis Toronto, ni weekend, puis mes familles Penetangwishn, puis Jamaica, ni weekend. Bonjour, bonne soirée, je m'appelle Larissa Crawford, je suis de Calgary, puis Toronto, et ma famille est de Penetangwishn et Jamaica. Hello, good evening, my name is Larissa Crawford. Originally from Calgary, been out in Toronto for about 7 years now, six, 7 years, and I have ancestry from Penetangwishn and Calgary. So thank you for opening up. I just want to recognize that was a beautiful land acknowledgement, and I really appreciate the amount of time and research you must have put into writing that, because too often I hear bad land acknowledgements. And I just wanted to add like my personal part to it, because I'm also operating in Toronto, so on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Petun, and then most recently the Mississaugas and New Credit. But I also want to acknowledge like the ancestors in this space, all of our ancestors in this space, and all of the work that's been done and laid down for us to be where we are today, to be in a position where we can start thinking about, okay, how are we going to get to these tables? How are we going to claim our space? And so I really want to recognize the sacrifices that we are standing upon, but then also the knowledge that we're still benefiting from. And then lastly, most of us are guests. And so I want to acknowledge that we are guests many of us are guests on these lands, and that we carry that responsibility as guests to seek truth and then reconcile, to be familiar with the TRC calls to action, and to be mindful of how we're applying those to our work, especially on the topic of policy and politics. So again, like, let's set the tone right. Okay. So I love webinars. Guaranteed half of you guys aren't even wearing pants right now. Like, this is so comfortable. So yeah, I'm pretty excited for tonight. So I'm going to be screen sharing a lot. And so I'm gonna kind of test it out right now. So you guys are gonna be able to see what I see. Cool, you guys can see what I see. So in terms of is throughout the session, if you hear something or you want something clarified, use the chat feature. So it's going to be at the bottom of your screen, and it's going to be a little speech bubble. Write in your questions, and as we're going through, it'll amass, and then at the end and the Q&A session, we'll address those questions first, and then any other questions that have come up. So if you really want to hold your queue and ask a question, do so in the chat area. Just because it's a little harder to go back and forth with webinar, that's kind of how we've decided to go with the Q&As. For accommodations, I designed this webinar to really appeal to different learning styles. So I'm someone who needs to read. And so if you're someone that needs to read, this is going to be great for you, the manual. If you need someone to hear it, if you're more of a lecture learner, then that's what this webinar is for. But if you find that I haven't met your accommodation needs, say you need bigger text or you need more diagrams, shoot me an email and I'll do my best to accommodate you. Puis je parle français, mais je ne suis pas très bien. Et cette session aujourd'hui, ça sera en anglais. Je suis désolée, mais si tu es plus confortable avec demander des questions en français et des commentaires en français, fais cela et nous pouvons faire le travail pour traduire. So yeah, I guess we'll kind of get started with, get right into it because, I mean, we have 2 hours, but let's try to make this as concise as possible. As someone who's a participant in a lot of webinars and a lot of conferences, I'm always looking from speakers for very concise, actionable steps. I don't want to hear a lot of fluff. I don't want to hear a lot of inspirational quotes. Like that doesn't work for me. And so that's kind of how I approach my speaking. I do everything with a purpose, and I try to make it as clear as possible that that is the purpose of what I'm saying or what I'm doing. And so you'll be leaving, I hope, with a lot of actionable steps. So if you look at your manual, I'm going to be going through the manual on my screen. If you have it with you, especially for those calling in, it may be good to follow along because I will be following along quite closely with the manual. So you'll see here our objectives. So really what I'm going to try to get out of this session are 4 things. And these are based off of the fact that, as communicated, that we're feeling like we need help in terms of approaches to telling our story, especially within framing like our lived experience in these applications, in our CVs, in this content that we're putting out, that we're branding ourselves with, essentially. And that once we get all that out, and maybe we do get into a policy space, what do we do then? Like, how do we act? How do we prepare ourselves? How do we network? How do we establish really meaningful relationships? And then really, how can I be implementing change? And so these are a series of concerns and feedback that I tried to build this webinar around. So our first objective, and this is going to be going in order, so drawing connections between your local and global impact. So in the first section, I really want to talk about, I'm going to talk about my story and kind of how I found purpose and direction, but then also giving you guys really concrete steps in terms of what I've done and what can be done to implement local change, global change, and to move between this community and boardroom activism. And I'll speak later to that. Framing your professional and lived experiences for applications, biographies, and CVs. So in the manual, I've been very open, and I've shared with you guys the most intimate details of my CV, my applications, my bios. And so these ones have all been successful, and so I wanted to share them with you in terms of my approaches and the kind of sentences, the languages I use, the language I use, and so that's what we're going to go through in section 2. In section 3, preparing for strategic boldness and assertion of identity in high-level policy and political spaces. So this is something I've learned. And Jakeepa, actually, I noticed that you're on, and you've seen a couple of my workshops, so you're going to be quite familiar with this section. And so we're going to go over action plans. So action plan for impact, and then action plan for self-preservation and growth. So these are tactics that I use to really identify what I need to go into a space where I feel like my identity and my values are going to be challenged, or that I'm going to have a hard time communicating those. So this is a really good strategic section. And then 4th is networking. And so I kind of want to be a bit more co-collaborative with this, and I want to open the discussion to maybe what works well for everyone else in terms of networking. And so I'm really going to focus on in-person networking and then social media networking. And more social media networking is becoming so core to establishing and continuing relationships after events. And so that one's a pretty exciting one. So yeah, I guess we went over the webinar outline. I'm not going to go over the biography because y'all will get enough of me for the rest of this. So I'm going to actually move into storytelling. Now, storytelling, I like to incorporate this because some people really learn well from storytelling. Also, this is a way that I can more organically kind of introduce myself and begin introducing the tactics that I'm going to be talking about for the rest of the webinar. And really my approach to this story is really telling you guys like how I found direction, how I found purpose in the great vast world that it is. And so I really reflect on kind of the steps that I took and the turning points that I am able to identify. And I want to share those with you because I feel like that's where I got a lot of my inspiration. That's how I actually started reflecting on these kind of things, with having other people, having mentors tell me that that's what they did. So that's what I'm going to try to do. So sit back, relax. The important stuff of my story is actually included here. So don't worry too much about like writing things down or anything. I'm gonna get to all of that. But we're actually gonna switch over. I hope you all can still see my screen. And me. I'm hoping you guys can still see me. But here we go. Okay, so in my journey, really when I think about global and local impact, I really had to, for my journey, I had to understand the global before I could really locate myself locally. And I say that, and it sounds kind of confusing, but like by acting globally, I was able to position myself with more insight. And in positioning myself in my locality, I could more effectively act locally to create global impact, if that makes sense. And it was through this process that I've been able to really understand where I come from and what direction I want to be heading in. And it was through this process I amassed the experience that allows me to really pursue what I'm so passionate about and do so while being able to support my family and make a pretty comfortable living. So kind of going way back. So let's look at this. So this is me when I was about 14. This is my youngest sister, Reina, and my middle sister, Maya. So I spent my formative years in the Albertan backwoods in a trailer park, a couple kilometers down from actually a KKK community. And I very vividly remember my first interaction with a racist, and it was when I was playing on the side of the road and they shouted out of their big old truck horrible slurs, and it was my first time hearing those. And so I think that really impacted me growing up. But anyways, we were food bank poor, and we relied on the charity of my school and my community to get by. But my sisters and I had no idea we were poor. Instead of going to Disneyland or vacations, we went to Family Friends Reserve, so mostly on the Kainai Blood Reserve, and territory, and we did no potty camping. We'd cook on the fire. We'd camp on the side of the river, and it was just, we knew nothing else. This was the life. And we had a forest as our backyard. Our trailer park was right on the edge of a really big forest, and so we got to spend every day outside, rain or shine, snow would get up to about 4 feet high, and we thought we were the luckiest kids in school. So that was kind of the brighter part of my formative years. If I fast forward to high school, my mother had just finished university, so she's single. She just finished university. She got a wicked teaching job, and we're living in Lethbridge, Alberta, which when I was there looks very different than it is now. That's all I'm going to say to that. In grade 10, I was introduced to this concept of globalization, and it was by my my social studies professor, Craig Finley. And so shortly after, a teacher of mine, so Sarah Burton, who's also my mom's friend and coworker because my mom taught at my high school, approached me with the opportunity to travel to Ghana. She was going on a trip to an old girls' school, and she said that if I could pay for my tickets, I could go. So I obviously said yes. I was getting excited, and as I was thinking about it, as I was being introduced to these ideas of globalization, I was thinking, like, okay, I have all of this stuff. Like, I really can't go empty-handed now, knowing like what I know. And so that's when I just kind of started thinking. And then my mom and I had a conversation about her friend starting a library on Kainai Blood Reserve, and it would be the first public library on a reserve in Western Canada. And so I was like, okay. And then the dots started to connect. And I was like, okay, the 16-year-old, I'm 16 years old at this point. And I decided, okay, I'm going to fundraise Bucks and School supplies. I'm going to bring what's appropriate to Ghana, and I'm going to bring what else is appropriate to Kainai. So it took about 7 months. I literally went to schools in the community and just said, hey, can I like set up a donation box? And I did. And it was great. Over several months, we raised hundreds of pounds of books and school supplies. It was really phenomenal how our community came together. And then I traveled to Ghana for a couple weeks, and we were able to start a library there. And so this was my first experience with fundraising, with social organization and travel. And I'm so grateful for it. And actually my high school, after I got back, ended up adopting, sorry, I totally forgot about the slides. Here are the girls. Here are the girls with all the books and school supplies. It was still probably, next to the birth of my daughter, one of the best experiences of my life. And it was amazing. But it was an experience that did not necessarily give me a sense of the cause or country I was best fit to work in. But it did shape 100% my desire to pursue humanitarian work and international development in post-secondary. So I moved to Toronto. I pursued a double majors honors in international development and communication studies. So I came to Toronto knowing I wanted to go on exchange. I knew that I wanted to further internationalize my education. I came to Toronto, and within 2 months, I submitted my application in my first year. And by March 2014, I got the acceptance, and I figured out, okay, I'm living in Istanbul, Turkey for the next year. And this was an interesting time. 2014, 2015 was a tense time to be living in Istanbul. That was during the Ebola crisis. That was also during a lot of ISIS tension. And so it was a year. I had gone there with a year of international development studies under my belt. I thought, I'm going to work with refugees. I'm going to do this amazing humanitarian work. I'm going to distribute aid. This is going to be my life. And I moved there. And I lived there for the year. I studied international law, and I volunteered with refugees. So I distributed aid. I organized bi-monthly information sessions for refugees in terms of living in Istanbul. I translated for French-speaking Africans coming up, again, from that Ebola crisis. And it was great. And I mean, when I was in Istanbul, I did a lot of traveling, volunteered in Egypt, traveled through Europe. And when I came back from exchange, a lot happened. And so I really want to speak to the importance of internationalizing your education, which there's a section on it here. So when I internationalized my education, it set me apart in terms of applications. So I applied, and like that is when I really started rolling in with successful applications. So I was able to completely fund my undergraduate degree with scholarships. And a lot of that came, again, after internationalizing my education, after going on exchange, after really making the most of it and traveling with purpose. One of the awards is a Terry Fox Humanitarian Award. So if there's anyone in high school or in their early years of university, make sure to check that one out, because that one really like transformed my life. I started working with the international office at York University as a global ambassador. So as an ambassador, this was actually really cool because I got to travel on the university's dime. Like I went to Hong Kong, I went to Thailand for United Nations leadership conferences. I was able to travel across Ontario to speak on behalf of York International. And I really got to expand my network through them, and it gave me a lot of opportunities. But then also, more than anything, after coming back from this exchange, I realized that frontline work was not for me. I take way too much home, and my skill set was just not best fit to be working in that context. And so here I am, like, okay, I'm coming back. It's my third year of university, and I still have no idea what the hell I'm doing. So I'm really trying to zone in, okay, what is my purpose? And so if you ask me now, I have a really clear sense of like my purpose and what I want to do, and the direction I want to take. And really it's around applying anti-racism and Indigenous knowledge to climate change policy and to environmental law, especially within the renewable energy and energy sector. And it took a lot of work to get to here, to simply so casually say that. It's taken a lot of time and a lot of intentional personal development. And so in terms of like the steps that I've taken, again, so this is Istanbul. This was one of the living assessments that I did. And this is my daughter. So I guess this is really where I saw a turning point. I had my daughter in my fourth year of university at the very beginning of it. And that's when I really started reflecting on my culture, my identity, the kind of world that, and the kind of country that I want my daughter to be brought up in. And so steps that I really took, and in terms of like establishing that groundwork. So I really found culture and the strengthened sense of identity. So I did family research and I reached out to elders in my community, because like if you don't have a strong sense of identity, you run the risk of appropriating other cultures. And I found that I was at risk of that when I was working in Istanbul, when I was so lost in terms of who I was that I was trying to be someone else. And so when I came home, I really focused on who am I, who do I come from, and what are my communities facing. I've always been involved, but it was never necessarily part of my work. And when I came back after that global experience, and granted I'd had a lot of other global experiences before that, but this was really transformative because I came back understanding that I really wanted to find a sense of direction, and it would have to start with reflecting, self-reflection. And so I really found culture, and that really excelled again when I became pregnant and when I had my daughter, because I did want to pass on this ancestry to her in an informed way, in an appropriate way, in a way that respects our ancestors. I looked at my values and why they are my values. So I brought you guys through my youth. I brought you guys through my high school, especially youth though, because when I started reflecting, okay, what's actually important to me? I was reflecting on it, okay, I find nature really important and traditional teachers around nature and Mother Earth. I find racism fascinating, and I really want to address it in every way that I can with love and education. And when I look at those core values, I can draw and like why they are. I look back at my childhood, and when I am able to look at that and look at the experiences that I had, even in terms of accepting charity from other people when we were trailer park poor, and we were getting benefits from our schools, and like those Christmas fundraiser things where they bring you a whole bunch of fundraised gifts. Like we got that stuff. And it really transformed our lives. And so realizing the significance of charity so early on, I think really shaped my values. And so being able to identify that, I'm able to now more closely relate to those values. I'm able to really lead with those values because I understand that that is who I am. That is at the core of my identity. And then I started exploring more research. Like, I used my school assignments to really delve into topics that I was passionate about. And believe me, especially if you want to be doing an Indigenous topic in any class that you want to do, you go to the Indigenous office and you tell them, my professor isn't letting me do this topic on this Indigenous subject, and you will have an army behind you. And so that's what I did on several occasions. And I really used the opportunity of my education to explore what I wanted to do, even if it was in a class that I wasn't totally crazy about. And then I reached out to mentors, and that was a huge thing, reaching out to mentors. And that's when I really started to see my success excel. And so this is me at graduation. This is with Zyra. It was really exciting. I graduated summa cum laude, which was really exciting because there were only a few people at that graduation ceremony who got it. And it was really important to me to have Zyra there because she had been in the class since about 12 days old. And so it was really important because it was equally her degree as it was mine. And the reason she is on stage is because of my mentor, because of Ruth Colzar-Green. And that is just one such small way in which mentors have shaped my whole world. And then taking on extracurricular learning seriously. So literally attending a conference a week, looking at webinars, taking all the free Eventbrite webinars and courses and meetups as I could, like literally just building my network. Before becoming a professional public speaker, I was watching professional public speakers. I was attending absolutely everything. And I explored my interests through on-the-ground volunteer work and through my volunteer work, because as I was exploring my interests and passion through volunteer work, as I started to pursue that professionally, I was able to say, look, I am committed to this field of work. Look how many hours, look how much time I've invested in this for free. Like, this is a reflection of how much I value this work and how much I value this field of work. And one way that I did that was through the Young Diplomats of Canada's Y7 delegation. So there's a G7 summit, but then there's also the youth component, the Y7 summit, and the Y7 delegation. So for youth from across all the G7 countries are selected. They come together at the summit, and we do our policy negotiations just like they did at the G7, and we come out with a call to action for the G7 agenda. And this was such a transformative process of being introduced to international policy. And now I'll tell you, I almost didn't apply. I got head delegate position, and like so many opportunities have come out of volunteering with Young Diplomats of Canada. But I was this close to not applying. I submitted my video interview 30 minutes before the deadline because I looked at it and I said, oh no, there's no way I'm going to get this. I don't have any policy experience. There's probably, I know way more people that would be way more qualified. And then it was a Sunday evening and I was just like, you know what? Okay, I'll do it. Literally 30 minutes in before the deadline. And then I ended up getting it, and it literally changed my life. I'm working in government because of that position. I am pursuing what I absolutely love because of this position, because I had, I don't know what it was, but it was just like, okay, why not? But I applied for that position. And so if I look at now, like I graduated from my undergrad in June 2018, and immediately after graduation, I had a great paying policy position at the Ontario Ministry of Energy as an Indigenous policy advisor. And that internship transformed into like my full-time position now. And so I'm an advisor at the Ontario Anti-Racism Directorate in another ministry. But I'm working in policy implementation, which is really exciting for me. And I'm really happy with like what I'm doing right now. And so if you take a look at that, that's kind of how I'd like to introduce myself, because it really flows with the rest of what I'm going to be talking about. And so I said I want you guys to leave with actionable things. And so when I think about what kind of change making I do, especially in the policy space, I like to try to use this example, like this kind of analogy. So I was fiddling around one time and I came up with this kind of diagram. So the way that I understand community and the way that I've been taught to understand it is that you are integral to your community. You are a part of a community. And it is your community around you that give you strength and power. And so here's your community. You have strength, you have power all around you. And they are some of the most, they're some of the most powerful sources of support and direction in your change making. And again, especially in policy. And so when I think about the kind of work that I do, it goes between the two. And so for some people, they may find that they're really focused on community-based change making, and that's where their absolute strength is. And that is 100% great. Some people might find that they're stronger in boardroom change making, which is also great. But for people who feel that they fall under boardroom change making, so more systemic oriented, working with power holders, using the language and mechanisms of institutions dominating powers. If you find that you fall better under that category, you still have a responsibility to make sure that you're engaging with the community, because too often I see youth that are too focused on getting the prestigious internships and getting all the right criteria and checking all the right boxes and being this carbon copy of what we're seeing today in politicians. And that's just replicating a system that is not working. And so it's our responsibility as youth, as the upcoming change makers, to recognize the importance of boardroom change making, but to relay back to community-based change making, to relay back to the community, because that is what, when I look at a lot of the issues that we're seeing out of government and politicians, a lot of it is coming from a disconnect between the communities that we're serving and the communities that we should be representing. And so this is a really, I just kind of broke this down in terms of my observations and experiences in the field of kind of what these look like, and just being aware, because sometimes I find that I've spent too much time in boardrooms. I need to go out on the land. I need to go to a youth conference. I need to do something to get out of here, to reconnect with reality, because you can get caught up in your own world here. And so this is a really good resource just to kind of examine how you can kind of take action in both ways. If you're interested in learning more traditional teachings on community, where I get a lot of my understanding from community is from the 7-generation principle and Ubuntu philosophy. So I'm not going to go into that too much, but these are links to some great starting points if you'd like to learn more. This too, I'm not going to get into too much, but for future reference for your action planning, in terms of creating local, national, and global impact, here are just some points that I've gathered through conferences that I've gone through my own experiences, in terms of like how you can be enacting this kind of impact, this kind of change at different levels. So like at local impact, establishing a chapter or program of an organization in the city or at your school. And I say that I think this is important because I think too often people think that they have to go out and start something new. And we talk about this a lot actually in international development. And so you get this overabundance of organizations doing the same thing. And so opening up a chapter is a really great way to kind of avoid that and learn more about the field. And so I guess I kind of want to transition into the second section in terms of like applying, because I touched on that earlier. Like I literally applied to the Y7 very last minute. And I guess just a couple points, I guess, from the last section, like the actionable steps that I take to get to where I am today is that I've applied for everything. And I guess I'm kind of going over this section. I apply for everything. I market my training and education beyond my degree. So again, that's lived experience, that's traditional knowledge, that's telling them that this is valuable knowledge, even though it's not institutional. I speak to my international experience, which always puts me in a unique position to serve well in that position, in that role that I'm applying for. And an emphasis that I'm going to be putting in this next section is I position my lived experience as an asset or qualification just like any other. And I'm really passionate about this. I'm going to get to this. And then I really genuinely draw my attention for the position back to the overall impact I'm seeking to make in the communities I seek to serve. And I say this because when I look at like how I've been able to successfully develop a professional speaking and training business, and being able to access a lot of the spaces that I have access to, it's because I've built my brand and I've really kept at the core of all of my work my passion and the impact that I'm seeking to make, always at the core. And especially as a mom, any time that I'm spending doing something else is taking away from my daughter, so I better freaking love it. So yeah, let's go on to section 2, because I feel like this is where we really want to get into the details of everything. So applications, CV, biography, writing approaches. So as I said, we're getting quite intimate here. We're going into my applications, my CVs, and my bios. And what I really want, I felt like this was the best way to kind of communicate what I'm trying to say in terms of how to frame things, phrases to use. When I'm trying to write a cover letter or an application, I find it most useful to look at what other people have written, just to understand the kind of tone, the language that they use, how they frame their experience. And so that's what I wanted to do for you guys. So you'll see a number of excerpts. In the manual, they're just highlighted. And so I'm going to be speaking to the highlighted pieces. So just to note that. I've also included the application, so the job descriptions or the position descriptions beforehand, so then we can see kind of what they're asking for and how I've addressed it in the letters. So I'm gonna have to zoom out a bit so y'all can see. So let's get into it. And I guess before I get into the bread and butter of everything, I want to recognize that I've worked on this skill for a really, really long time. First year, my first week at York University, I signed up for a resume writing workshop. And ever since then, I've attended grant writing workshops at conferences. I've attended literally everything I could get my hands on in terms of grant writing, resume writing, biography writing. I've done all those courses. And so please recognize that this is a skill and that it takes time to develop this. And the more that you do it, the more that you write this, the more things you apply to, the quicker you get at it. The way that I always like to think about it is that if I spend 8 hours applying for a whole bunch of different scholarships and maybe I only get one, and maybe it's $1,000 for 5 hours, 8 hours, making $1,000 is pretty okay. And so that's how I like to think about it. And the more that you do it, the more pieces that you can be drawing out from each application, from each CV that you're writing. And so it really builds. And I think that it's quite intimidating to go in it fresh. But once you get in it, once you make that commitment, once you start treating these applications as like your full-time weekend job or whatever, or like really investing the time into this, you'll see results. And so I think that's really important to recognize. In terms of building your own capacity, I've included just a few ways that I've done this, so you can take a look at that. So, job application. So this is for a trainer job, mandatory 1-year experience. So this is going to be going over the 1-page cover letter and 4-page CV. So let's get into this. For those calling in, I'm really sorry. This part's going to kind of suck for you. But if you're able to bring it up on your phone, it would probably be easier to follow along with this part. So, trainer job application. So, Tansi, hello. So this first line, please accept this letter and CV below as my application to the position of trainer with company as advertised on LinkedIn. So where I found it, that's often what I'll include in the first line. And especially if a mentor referred you to this position or an employee of the organization. So like if they've done that, make sure you mention that because that demonstrates a bit more of a commitment. If you go down to this is just a way to kind of phrase, I've applied my background in blank to this field. Is a good way to approach just for phrasing. Outlining some clients. So if you've worked with some really good clients or some really good organizations that you think will mean something to the receiving, to whoever you're applying to, it's cool to add that. And then responsibilities, outlining really concretely what your responsibilities were in that position. Here, I really use the phrase, I was brought into this organization too. And so that's just a way, again, for phrasing. And again, my responsibilities. So really, I find one-page cover letters are some of the hardest to write because it's such little space to write what should be so much. And so I really feel that if you're looking at this cover letter, really pay attention to the phrasing and points of emphasis and really what I'm trying to draw out in terms of the list that they've given me. And then in this role, I've built my capacity to create training programs, and so building capacity, your capacity to do something, I really like that word. I really like framing my skills in that way and my capacity to do something, and this built my capacity. So that's a really great way to approach something like that. In terms of the CV, now this is a big CV. This is my longer form one. I do have shorter form ones, but I wanted to just provide the longer form one. What's really how I approach my CV. And for anyone wondering, I used just Google Docs. I just formatted a Google Doc. Profile to me is one of the most important things because it offers an opportunity to frame your CV and to personalize it. So it's not just another CV thrown across someone's desk. And so, and then again, I'm able to communicate aspects of my story. What is my work right now? Like, what am I trying to do? And so I'm trying to build on my energy and climate change experience. It's reflected in my CV, but I'm trying to build it more. And so I try to make note of that in that profile section. In the skills and specialization, I'm really looking at, okay, how do I really identify my skills and explain it in a relevant way to the job application. And so this is a really important space to be able to do so and to be able to kind of outline some details that may be of interest to the hiring party. In terms of, I always put institutional education because it's not the only kind of education you can get. But this is a good place because oftentimes if you've been academically, if you want to share your academic grades, there's often not a space really to be able to do that. So adding it here in one of the bullet points is a good place to do that. Education and training. This is where I find that I help a lot of people with writing their resumes. This is where I find people totally just forget stuff. Like a workshop that you did, a training session that you did, even if it was at a conference, and you're finding that you need to fill up a bit of space, adding those are great. They're a great way to reflect your interest beyond the classroom of something that is important to you. And so, like even this was a one-day workshop. but it was really intensive education and training. And this specifically has been pointed out by an employer in terms of their interest in hiring me. So it's really important to, and don't undersell yourself when you're looking at further education and training, because this is really important, and it's really going to set you apart, because so many people have degrees now, and especially an undergrad degree. So you're really going to have to demonstrate how you shine beyond that degree, and further education and training is really going to help with that. Professional employment. So the way that I structured, and it depends on like your amount of experience and what you want to emphasize, but the way that I've divided kind of my experience is looking at, okay, professional employment, so like more professional positions, not necessarily my retail jobs, and then research experience. And so if I want emphasis on my research, then I'll add that section, and just kind of divvy up my experience like that. Select awards. So if you're only like if there's a long list of awards, or if there's a long list of presentations or even positions, and you're significantly reducing it, including select, is a great way to reflect that this isn't all that I got, but let me show you. Let me give you a little taste test. And let me stick to the word count. So select is a good place to use. Volunteer experience. So again, I mentioned this earlier, but framing your volunteer experience in an interview or in a written application, like, I am committed to this work, and it's reflected in the hours and time that I've invested in my volunteer work. And that is a way that I actually ended up getting my anti-racism advisor job with Ontario government, is because I really was able to reflect, like, yo, I was volunteering 20 hours a week on this project. Like, this is important to me, and I am committed to this work. Because employers are going to see that, and they're going to be like, wow, like she really is committed to it, and we want someone like that on our team. So this is a great way. Treat it just as importantly as any other section in your resume. And then again, this is just a very snapshot version of the presentation, so I include that word select. So there's CV. Again, you can take a closer look to like how I've structured it in terms of including the position, the organization, and the date that I was there, and then also outlining important responsibilities, and then my supervisors. This is also great because this translates really well into LinkedIn. So if you do this work for your CV, you can put it right into your LinkedIn profile. And a bit more on social media later, but doubling down on that work now will save you time later. So this is a letter of intent. So a letter of intent is a bit different than a cover letter, because a cover letter, you're really outlining what experience you have that's relevant to the job that you're applying for or the award that you're applying for. But a letter of intent is really supposed to offer more of a narrative in terms of why do you care, why do you want this position. And this is one that I want to spend a bit more time on, because this is really where I've framed my lived experience as qualifications. So my opening line, as a young Métis Jamaican woman and mother, everything I do professionally is an extension of who I am, where I come from, and of those who come after me. For this reason, I place great value on the story behind what I do. This letter is intended to offer a personal narrative to enhance the accompanying CV and letters of reference. In my application for, oh shoot, well, you guys know what fellowship it was for. This is the wrong edition. So you guys are getting the full version of this one. So yeah, through my daughter, and here is where, again, I'm outlining my lived experience. So through my daughter, communities, institutional education, and research, I've developed a strong sense of purpose and direction. And then I state my purpose and direction. There is an unprecedented opportunity to, and so in this first paragraph, I really tried to demonstrate my knowledge of what I'm talking about. Like, I know what I'm talking about. I'm going to tell you some things that you may not know about this field. I'm going to say how that's relevant to me, how that's applicable to me, and how that's shaped my interest in applying to this fellowship. And so being able to demonstrate that, I think, is really important, because you're identifying that it's more than just personal. It's more than just, not fluff, but it's more than just intent. Like, you really put in the work to pursue this quite seriously. If we look at this last one, the realization of these aspirations is necessary and possible within my lifetime, and is this understanding that draws me to the fellowship. So just phrasing, good transition structure. I've come to appreciate the intersections between Canadian law, so here I'm really speaking to what I want in the future, to contribute to my future, and how I see this within my career lifespan. And one really important point that I'd like to draw out is how I framed my work after graduating. So it's actually really hard to get a job in government without a master's degree. And a way that I've gotten around that, and a way that I've been framing my experience after graduating, because I've been out of, since June last year, I've graduated, is that I frame the work that I've done as experiential learning, experiential education, because that's what I've done. Like, I really wanted to understand policy. I really wanted to understand the workforce before pursuing anything more, before pursuing a graduate or law school. I really wanted to understand, like, what's going on, how is this all working, how are things so messed up, and how is that staying the same? Because that's kind of how I want to be able to identify, this is what I can change, this is what I can be doing, and to be taking that education with a more informed lens. And when I frame it like that, it's hard for someone to argue. And once I'm able to identify, this is what I'm taking away from these positions, this is how I've built my capacity in these ways, it's hard for them to argue that when you're very specific like that. So that's the way that you're able to, if you don't have that postgraduate education, this is a way to be able to frame your professional experience in a way that the employer can still see value in it. Phrasing this equipped me to participate as, just a different way to say something. My keen interest in community engagement, research, and stakeholder consultation translated well into the YSM space. So again, translated well, my keen interest. These are all just words and phrasing that can help diversify your language in your letter. Here I'm able to, this is actually a pretty important one. In developing or reviewing policies relevant to energy project procurement, duty to consult responsibilities, and environmental assessments, I came to understand how my perspective is not only valued, but needed in public policy. It is my lived experience as, and I list all the things that I am. These perspectives are, you know what, I'll read it. It is my experience as an Indigenous and racialized woman, a survivor of sexual violence and poverty, a person living with a chronic pain disability, having lived in both rural and urban settings, and as a young mother, that gives me the genuine capacity to carry out my responsibilities with unique insight and consideration. These perspectives are frequently underrepresented in public policy, energy, and sustainability sectors. A reality I'm too often confronted with as I attend and speak at events such as Latida. So that's a big one, because in this section, I'm literally telling them my lived experience is a qualification and these are the reasons why. And you are going to recognize my lived experience as a qualification, because most employers aren't going to be asking lived experience questions. They're not going to be looking for that. And so that's when you really have to tell them. And they may think that, oh, it's not politically correct to ask that. And you're right, in a lot of cases it isn't. But that's when it's on you to be able to tell them, this is how my lived experience, this is how my identity informs me in a way that will make me a better employee, that makes me a better applicant. And so again, if you're having troubles trying to frame your lived experience, look at that and look how I structured that, because that's an effective way to communicate that. At this time in my professional development, this is really important to me, and this is why I'm keen to widen my understanding. So really identifying where I need development and making sure it aligns really well with the position or application that I'm submitting. This is important. I don't think it's done enough in letters, but I think it makes it better to read. And if an employer or revisor, because I've been in that position where I'm reviewing applicants, they enjoy reading it, they're gonna like your application better. So I say, if I'm to circle back to my aspiration to improve and extend environmental policy and legislation in Canada, I want to acknowledge that this cannot be realized through individual efforts alone. So in this paragraph, I'm telling them, if you bring me in, I'm gonna have a multiplying effect. I'm gonna give you more bang for your buck, because I'm gonna take this back and I'm gonna share it with my community, and I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna take this information, I'm gonna try to empower others to the best of my ability. And when you're able to situate yourself like that, if you're able to situate, this is what I can do for you, this is what I can do for your program, that is effective marketing. That is effective self-marketing. And being able to do that is going to be a key way to catch attention and be able to say, this is what I can do for you, versus I want this, I want this, I want this from you, I want this from the program. This is what I can do for the program. And then how I close off my my section is, again, I'm bringing it back to my lived experience. Sorry guys, it's pretty dark. I'm gonna put in the light. Okay. Oh dear. The Métis are often referred to as cultural bridge crossers. Our culture, history, and identity are in essence of two worlds. The added intersections of my identity further position me to facilitate tensions between identities and group politics. In this capacity, I've found my power. With the privilege of being able to be a fellowship fellow, I would seek to develop and share this power with the intention of bridging Canada in a way that transcends political stances of our natural world and our future generations. Thank you for your time and consideration in reviewing my application. And so again, this is tying it back to lived experience. And so really reflecting like how my lived experience, how my identity, how my values all tie back to this position and this opportunity, how that's going to make me a better applicant. And then I close off, I always, if space permitting, include a land acknowledgement at the end. It's a nice touch if I feel it's a good space to do that. So we're just moving along here, trucking along, and we're good on time. So this is good. Just a 5-minute break after we're done this section. Just if you want to go to the bathroom, I'm gonna need to have a drink, water. But okay, let's look at biographies. Sorry, you guys, I'm telling my partner to get off the internet. All right, biographies. General bio and short bio. Okay, so I proudly pass on Métis and Jamaican ancestry to my daughter, Zara. So again, with biographies, don't be scared. If you want to, if you reflect on anything, okay, what are the most important parts of my identity? I like putting that at the forefront of my biography. I think it's important that up front they know who I am and what I'm doing it for. Internationalizing my post-secondary education, so I do mention that. And again, looking at this just in terms of structure, in terms of framing, and then like clearly identifying what you are. And that might not necessarily be your actual job description, that might not actually be, I am an advisor to this. Like for me, I'm more than an advisor. Like I apply my research and activism to my advisor work. And so I find it's more important to acknowledge that I'm a researcher and activist before my job position, my job title. And then I lead into lobbying successfully, recently transitioned. This is good phrasing to explain if you had a position and you've recently gone into another one. It's good phrasing, I guess. And then I go into my roles, my most significant roles. And then again, having this multiplying effect, just really trying to emphasize that in my bio. Now, my most recent work, adding that and just making it clear that this is what I'm trying to do right now, and this is what I want to be connecting on right now. And then adding a little personal closing sentence. I like this because if you're at a speaking event or like whatever this bio is being used for, whether it's on LinkedIn and this is a good like link. This is my LinkedIn bio. So like LinkedIn bio, I send it in for speaking. But it's a great way for like people to be able to connect with you beyond your professional experience. And so I've connected with people over hiking or water activism because they saw that in my bio. And so it's a great way to more organically start meeting someone, especially in terms of networking, which we'll get to in a little bit. And then a shorter bio. So when you're wanting to maybe look at your biography, and again, sorry, writing these bios is a great process because as you're starting to do applications, you're able to directly take this bio and plop it into an application. So having a couple of these ready to go is a great idea. In terms of a more tailored biography, you want to get straight to the point right away. And so again, what I am, and then who currently serves as, and then a couple of my most significant positions relative to what I'm submitting the biography for. It's okay, and I often encourage, if you're an activist, let them know that. Like, that's important work. And so letting them know and recognizing your activism and what your activism is around is a really great way to demonstrate that you are personally invested in this work. And then passing on, again, I still maintain that identity piece and that purpose piece in all of my biographies. So I'm gonna take a 2-minute break. I think everyone can take a 2-minute break if we just want to collect ourselves, maybe go to the bathroom. But I will be back at 7:45 sharp.
Thanks, Larissa. This is Eugenia here from OCIC. Just want to say thanks to Larissa and feel free to take that break, but do come back. We're going to have space for a Q&A after, so we'll see you in a bit.
And again, I started developing these. So I'm a researcher. I love research. And one of my favorite research methodologies is results-based management. So it's an approach that really it encourages you to start, okay, what is the impact I want to make? What is the long-term impact I want to make? And then you go backwards from there. And so you're identifying what steps you have to take to get there, what needs to go into those steps, discerning a timeline, and then making sure every single action is aligned with the long-term vision. I think it's a really effective way to kind of plan out, again, impact, change making. And I've adopted it in a way that's a bit more simplified, and that you can apply to in more personal reflection. And so there's two action plans: action plan for impact and action plan for self-preservation and growth. And I developed these tables as I'm entering a space where I know my identity is going to be challenged, where I know I'm going to have a hard time in that space. I'm not going to create this as I'm going to like an Indigenous youth conference, because like maybe the action plan for impact, but not necessarily spaces where I feel safe, where I feel really welcome. I really put effort into these when I know I'm going into high-level policy spaces where I'm out of my comfort zone, where it's likely that I'm not going to see a lot of people that look like me, where it's likely going to be male-dominated, where it's likely going to be a bit of an older crowd. And so that's when I really invest in making and developing these tables. So in terms of action plan for impact, you see here, purpose of creating the action plan for impact is to identify context-specific goals. So in a new environment, in your job, in your volunteering, and steps needed to achieve them. So this action plan will uncover essentially how you enact change or impact. And so you're gonna have, you have I guess three columns: short-term, medium-term, and long-term. These are gonna be your goals, and they're going to be broken up into timelines. So identifying, okay, what is your goal? At what point? Is that going to be 6 months from now? Is it going to be 5 years from now? Figuring that out and then working backwards as you divvy up your goals. And then down here you have your goals and your inputs. So your goals are going to be what are smaller goals that are going to position you in a way that you can enact the long-term impact. And then you have inputs. So inputs are going to be the steps that you need to take to achieve each little goal. And so this table can get quite extensive, because it's likely you're going to have several goals and then several inputs for those goals. So be aware of that. But this is a simplified version. This is something that I used. And so for the example that I've used here is the position I had as an Indigenous Policy Advisor intern with the Ontario Ministry of Energy. My role involved duty to consult assessment, so we ensured that developers meet the standards for Indigenous consultation on energy projects. It was a 6-month period position. And so I divvied up my table, and this is the table I made actually when I started my position. So I divvied it up into 2 months. I had 6 months, so it went nicely in there. And then I thought, okay, what do I want to leave this position having done? And I wanted to build lasting relationships with the First Nations communities. And that's coming out of the fact that I can't get into too much detail, but like just the general nature of the relationships between government and communities. And so I really wanted to contribute to bettering that situation. Okay, and then I thought, okay, if I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do that through duty to consult assessments, I have to take a lead on duty to consult assessments, because the person that's lead is the one contacting the communities. So I was thinking, okay, if I want to take lead on an assessment, I'm going to have to help out with one. And so after identifying my goals, I started thinking about, okay, what are the inputs that I have to do to make sure that I'm achieving those goals? This is a time that you may want to bring in your colleagues, that you may want to bring in your mentors, and even your supervisor. My supervisor loved seeing this. When I brought this table to her and I was like, what are the inputs that I can be doing to make sure I achieve these goals? She felt that it really showed proactive thinking, that it really showed engagement and intent. So it's a really good way to reflect your interests and communicate what you want out of your role with your manager, or with your supervisor, or with your team, whatever it is. It's a really good way to make sure that what you're doing is aligned with what you want to get out of it. And then identifying, again, just the steps that I had to take to make sure that I achieved those goals. So this is kind of what a blank slate looks like. And so normally in like a workshop setting, I'd have everyone do it and we kind of talk about it. But this is a webinar. You have this resource, and so use it at will. And again, this can be used. I use it before going to a conference. I used it before going to Y7. I use it for a lot, and it can be really quick. It can be like in a little notepad where it's just some critical self-reflection, and it's going to position you well for networking. It's going to position you well for again, getting what you want out of what you're going into. Now, action plan for self-preservation and growth. This one's a bit more fluid between and transcends roles a bit more. And so this one, you're really looking to identify your values and the tactics that you need to take to protect those values when they are challenged. And this is really important to me, and this is something that I feel everyone should do just in general. So like really self-reflecting on what are your values, identifying your values. I find it's easier to think about it when I pose it as a question. And then what are the tactics you're going to take to ensure that you're protecting those when they're challenged? So let's maybe just go through this. So I identify self as a value. So like, what does self-care look like to me? And when I think about it, okay, what does it look like to me? For me, attending protests, because at protests, I'm able to be loud, I'm able to be angry, I'm able to cry, I'm able to express all this emotion that you can't always express in a policy space and decision-making spaces. I'm also able to connect with so many people that just get it, because if you're going into policy, one thing you're going to realize really quickly is that there's a lot of disconnect between the community and the policy work. And that can get really frustrating sometimes. And so going to these protests are a great way to network, they're a great way to let off steam, and they're a great way to do so while still acting with purpose. And then saying no and taking time to relax on the weekends. I haven't been very good at that lately. I'll be straight up with that. But especially since being diagnosed with a chronic pain disability in August, having to say no and understanding when to say no, again, I'm not great at that yet, but that is something that I've identified as being part of my self-care regime. Now, if I look at family, how do I make sure I spend more time with my family than at work? So setting up an arrangement to work from home, it's now twice a week with my supervisor. So really seeking out those accommodations, and even before I had medical accommodations, I'd still work out an arrangement like that. And then starting work earlier to leave later, or to leave earlier. Sorry, there's a typo there. To leave earlier as well. So then I am getting home and I'm able to hang out with Zyra, my 2-year-old daughter. Now, this one's a big one. My identity as a Black Indigenous woman. How do I claim my identity or assert my identity in this space? And this one is one of the more complicated ones, and it's one that but it's one that you can really be strategic and be strategically bold in this situation. So sometimes I'll rock my afro, I'll wear my moccasins, bead jewelry to the office. This morning, actually, I wore my hair curly and I wore my moccasins, and I looked in the mirror and I was like, do I not look professional enough today? And then I checked myself. I was like, okay, why don't you think you look professional? And I thought about it. It's like, okay, it's because of my hair. My hair is curling. It's because I'm wearing moccasins. And then I was like, no, you know what? I am checking that Eurocentric version of what professionalism is, and I'm going to work because this is who I am, this is my identity, and they're going to love it. But you can be more strategic and you can be more bold with it as well. So just for an example that I like using, I was on a stage in Paris a couple months ago in November. And I was speaking on a panel, and I was only youth. Speaking on a panel, and I wore my red dress, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the red dress movement for missing murdered Indigenous women. And so I thought this was a really good opportunity to bring that conversation to an international stage. But the thing is that the topic of the panel it was on inclusive business and inclusive progress. So I was kind of on it, but I needed more. I needed more to bring it into that space. And so I wore my red dress. And so the tactic of wearing my red dress, when I thought about how do I assert my identity, how do I assert the things I care about, well, a tactic was to wear that red dress. And in the middle of that panel, I stood up and I did a call for action for missing, murdered, Indigenous women. And I brought that to an audience who, for many, had no idea we were experiencing this crisis. And it was reflected in their very emotional responses of sadness and crying and stuff, not of anger. I mean, there were angry people, but that's another story. But it was a way that I was able to be very strategically bold. And the way that I got to there was through making this and assessing this and really reflecting on these questions before going into those spaces and as I was writing my content. So again, here's just kind of an outline of what I use. So again, this is, I do full workshops on this. It's really good activity to do. It's really good self-reflection process. And when people ask me like, how do you not burn out? Like, how do you not do this? Or how do you figure out this? This is where the magic happens, is through tables and self-reflection like this. So we're on to our final section, and I'm going to try to whiz through this in the next about 10 minutes, so then we can have some really good Q&A session. So section 4, Networking 101. So foundational reading. These are some really good like resources, and this is going back to kind of the idea of resume writing. Really investing time and energy in terms of developing your skills to network, because this is definitely, for many, not something that comes naturally. It wasn't for me. I'm a very outgoing person, but in terms of networking to establish meaningful relationships and get opportunities out of it, that is where it takes a bit more investment in terms of how you approach it. It's not just conversation. So the most important thing that I've been taught by my mentors about networking is that it's not about what you take, it's about what you give. And when you're able to position yourself in what can I do for you? What can I give you? Once you start shifting the narrative like that, once you start positioning yourself like that, you're going to see a lot of opportunities come your way, and you're going to see them come fast. At least when I realized this, that's when I saw a real shift in terms of how effective I was at networking and taking something away from it. And often that was in giving something. But in terms of how to do this, asking questions about their organization, work culture, their clients, and their priorities. Because when you're able to start delving into that, you're not only demonstrating that you're interested in their work, but you're encouraging them to speak, and you're encouraging them to, and in doing that, you're able to identify organic segues for which you can share your own experience and how it might match, your interests and how they might match with what they're doing. And people love to talk about themselves. So this is often a fail-safe approach. Figuring out what they're trying to get out of the event. So why are you here? What brought you here? This is a good way to figure out, like, can you contribute to what they're looking to get out of this? Or can you support them? Can you be part of what they're trying to get out of this event? Because that's always a great person. That's always a great thing to be to someone else. And then be authentic and be honest about your gaps of knowledge. So I've learned this very quickly as I've entered the world of energy, because I'm not trained in energy. I'm not trained as a scientist or an engineer. And so I'm trained on the policy side. And so when I'm meeting a lot of these people at these events, they're often the technical people. They're often the engineers and talking about all these things I have no idea about. And so I realized very quickly that instead of just nodding, pretending like I know what they're talking about, I really asked them, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that. I'm more familiar with the policy side of energy. Could you maybe explain that a bit more? Doing this is an active listening technique, and it's a way that you can really demonstrate that you're interested in what they're saying, you're interested in learning more, and oftentimes this can lead to really successful networking. So really being honest about it, being authentic about it, especially as youth, we have a bit more leeway with that, because it's kind of what's expected of us, and situating them eventually in maybe a position as a mentor is, again, serving them in terms of being able to give back in a way that they would enjoy. I wanted to provide these questions because these are great questions in terms of getting to know you questions, getting to know your field questions, getting to know their organization questions, and then wrap-up questions. So yeah, these are just a good resource just to read through and familiarize yourself with them. Read through them before going into a networking space is a great way to go about doing that. Now, simple in-person networking tactics. So I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and the CEO of this conference came into the youth part of the youth segment of the forum, and he gave a speech and stuff. The most useful part of that whole youth component was what he gave us in terms of networking techniques. And he recognized that we were about to go back into a huge room of CEOs, huge people in the sector, and that we didn't really know anyone, and we'd have to walk into this huge reception room and just insert ourselves into all these conversations. And it's daunting. It's very scary. And so these are some of the techniques just that I've amassed, but then also that he was able to provide in terms of in-person networking techniques. So handing out your business card. Always holding on to it until you're done the conversation as a sign of respect, not just throwing in your purse as you're talking. Collecting business cards. Oh, sorry, that was collecting business cards. Handing out business cards. Having a card holder, I've learned this very quickly. Having a card holder, keeping them clean is nice, and having one. Using Vistaprint, that's what I use to make my my business cards. Are cheap, they come quickly, and they're always nice. So Vistaprint is a really good place to start designing. They have a lot of good templates, but you have a lot of freedom to design as well. Walking into a reception room where you don't know anyone. So this is kind of what we were talking about. So stand by the food and drink table because everyone loves food and drink, and it's a great way to do a bit of small talk, especially if it's open bar. If it is a conference and you see someone who asked a question during a session, or maybe they spoke on a panel, using what they said as an opportunity to open conversation is a great way to just introduce yourself and get a conversation going. Now, including yourself into a pre-existing conversation, this has always been the hardest thing for me, and it's always kind of uncomfortable, especially if you don't do it right or if they are not receptive to it. So a way that I've been taught is like situate yourself beside the group speaking, making eye contact with others in the group, and sometimes it's worth introducing yourself, asking, do you mind if I join? And that's always the same one. Do you mind if I join? They'll be like, oh yeah, or like, oh yeah. And you can kind of gauge like what the response is. And then being honest about not knowing anyone else. And doing that is usually a point where people will be like, oh, so why are you here? Like, it can open doors to more conversation. And then wearing your traditional dress and regalia. And I say this because oftentimes, again, we may second guess ourselves before leaving and do I look professional enough? And I think you really got to own it. You really have to own it because, and I think back to another forum that I was at where I wore my moccasins, and it was a very corporate event. And I wore my like beautiful beaded moccasins. And every single conversation I had that led to an opportunity came and started by my moccasins. And so really owning that and really feeling confident to wear your traditional dress, to wear your regalia to the appropriate spaces can really open doors for you. And it can be recognized really positively, and it can really, again, it can improve your networking opportunities. Now, the last part that I want to go over is just simple online networking tactics, because this is where the power of establishing really meaningful relationships after the initial networking event can happen. So this is where the magic happens. So a tactic that I've actually found really effective is writing a LinkedIn article after after a conference or after an experience. And doing so and tagging the organization, because oftentimes they love seeing content, especially review content. So speaking about your experience, thinking about your key takeaways, about the networking that you did, writing testimonials. This is all ways that you're able to not only contribute to their content, but that you're able to raise your profile. And if they start circulating that content, then people who are at that event have access to your information or your profiles now. And it's just a good way to raise your profile. Sharing your notes. This is actually a really great way. So if you're taking notes, especially on a laptop at an event, and you see someone struggling to write it down, or like someone forgot a pen or whatever, or you're in conversation with someone, just let them know, I take really good notes. And if you'd like, I could share my notes with you from the conference. And doing that can really, again, it's not what you give, it's not what you take, it's what you give. And this has really opened the doors to establish on a more personable level, a connection between, say, a CEO or a director or someone who would maybe be sometimes harder to establish a personable relationship with. So this is a really great way, and I found really effective. And so I use Google Drive for all my notes, and then I just share. And again, it's a great way to start establishing those meaningful connections and serving a purpose for someone else. Posting on Twitter using their hashtag, really big one in terms of connecting with people during an event, during a networking event. Sending up a following email on the following Monday. I like doing this because it doesn't get lost in the junk from the weekend. It's at the top of the email list, and you're following up after they've had time to kind of settle after the event. And really reflect on, oh yeah, like they were so awesome. I want to totally network with them now. Like, it's a great way to kind of remind them, hey, I'm here, and we had an awesome conversation, and we should stay in touch. And then in that email, you can also propose a phone call. So proposing a follow-up phone call, I've really, over the past couple of years, realized the power of these phone calls and having these phone calls. And being able to talk things out is really can really improve that networking. So I'm gonna close up before Q&A, just because, like, in case people want to jump off and don't care too much for the Q&A, I want to speak a bit to self-care, because a lot of people, I know it doesn't seem like I'm doing a very good job at this right now in terms of not burning out, because I'm really tired. But we have to keep this in mind, and we have to always keep self-care at the forefront of what we're doing. And we have to keep this in mind too, because our work is so valuable. And our self-care is not selfish. Our work is valuable, our self-care is not selfish. And we are not told this enough, especially as young people. Because it's not only valuable, it's necessary. Because I'm guessing that if you're on this call, you kind of know what I'm about, and you kind of know that social justice, racial equality, recognizing the faults within the systems that we're seeing at play, and using policy and politics as a tool to address those issues. I'm hoping that you're kind of aligned with that mission, and that's important, and that is necessary work, and we aren't told that enough, I don't find. And that our uncertainty in what we're doing and in this field is 100% valid. 100% valid. And I think because our passions and our interests can be so fluid, and as fluid as we are, our exposure to new ideas and new spaces, that our passions changing is also valid. And I think that there have been times where I really needed to hear that, and I didn't. And so I really wanted to say that your uncertainty and your changing passions, that's all valid, and that's all natural. And then again, our self-care needs to be prioritized. So we really need to invest in the research, the time, the energy in our self-care regimen, because, and I say that it's not personal, it's not selfish, because we owe our work, we owe our loved ones, and we owe ourselves the best version of ourselves. And if we are going to be the best versions of ourselves, we have to care for ourselves. We have to love ourselves. And that is the furthest thing from selfish. So I really wanted to emphasize that point. Now, in terms of kind of a closing message, this is one of my favorite tweets in the history of Twitter. And this is Lin-Manuel Miranda. So if anyone's a fan of Moana, he's the writer, beautiful writer of all of those lovely songs. And he says, "You can't let all the world's tragedies into your heart, you'll drown. But the ones you do let in should count. Let them manifest action." And so this one really spoke to me, and I saw it when I really needed to see it. Because in this world of social media and there's so many things wrong, it can be so exhausting to have to feel like you have to care about everything, say something about everything, and do all of it appropriately. And that gets overwhelming. And I think it's important to recognize that, no, you don't need to be invested in everything, but you should be invested in something, and you should be acting on something. And so I think that that really hits the mark in terms of validating, again, our uncertainty and our passion and our intent. So without further ado, I would like to open it up to questions. So I don't know how we want to do this. If you are deciding to sign off, if you don't want to stick around for the Q&A, the video, the recording will be made available shortly, and maybe OCIC, you want to speak a bit more to that?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Larissa. So it's Eugenia back online. Let's give Larissa a little bit of a voice break. And I was thinking, I've been monitoring the Q&A section right now, the chat section, and we have 4 really interesting comments and questions from the get-go. So I'm thinking it's best, if you're still around, the people that post them, for them to speak to it a little bit more. What sparked this question, and where are you watching from? Who are you? Introduce yourself very briefly, so that we get more context on who you are, what you're struggling with, and why you'd like this type of help. So I'll call on the first 2. And I'm so sorry if I don't say your names right. Please say them properly when you introduce yourself. I see Arjari, I think, speaking to finding a sense of community, and Karen, who's asking on researching or resources on ancestry and family. So if either of you are still around, perhaps you can unmute yourself, press play on your camera if you want to, and speak to your question or pose your question to Larissa.
Absolutely. So hi, my name is Arjari. Thank you so much for a great webinar so far. One of my intentions was to start participating in more webinars, and this is my little version of, I guess, networking in ways and making those little steps to achieve my goals. So my question, I actually had 2, but the first one was about trying to find a sense of community. So you spoke about this global and local perspective. I've graduated from university a few years ago, and I'm, in my late 20s now, and I feel like I'm almost having to catch up in certain ways. I don't necessarily identify or connect with like my own like ethnic community and its background, and I guess my question is, maybe to reframe it a little bit, is, do you have any advice for somebody who's trying to find an intentional community? Because that global learning that I've had in terms of a year's experience of international development fieldwork was really valuable to me, but now it's about kind of turning inwards, about finding that sense of community, because for far too long I feel like I don't have that here in Toronto.
And like, I can't say I have a full-on answer to that, because I feel that way too in Toronto. Like I'm from Calgary, and I find that I do miss the community that I have in Calgary. And that community is largely centered around my family. But in terms of making an intentional community, like how I've connected with community here in Toronto is through research. Like it sounds so nerdy, but it's through research. Like I was a participant in a research project that looked at Black, Indigenous lived experiences, identities, and that's when I really started connecting with the wider community here in Toronto. But ways that I've been able to maintain community has been through protest and being involved with marches and connecting with people who really care about the same things that I care about, but then also through conferences. And that's really where I've found, especially in the energy and climate change sector, that's where I've found my community, is through going to conferences and through this networking that I've been doing. But like, honestly, searching Eventbrite and going to like all the free stuff that I can do, or like under $20 events, because you'll start seeing the same people at certain events, and then you'll start making connections. And when I think about the strong community of women, especially that I have right now, especially in the energy sector, like that's who I see as a large part of my community. And when I think of communities, that's one of them. And I've built that through going to conferences and going to these extracurricular things and just getting out there and being really open to speaking with people and meeting new people and following up and connecting in personal ways on Instagram and on and texting. And so I feel like that's been a way that I've been able to intentionally build a community around a sector that I'm passionate about versus like an identity marker. That kind of address?
Awesome, thank you. I think, no, it's definitely a start to the conversation in terms of like brainstorming for myself and like setting my own intentions and my own goals. I've only been home for just over 3 months, and I feel like I've already kind of made some short-term goals, which is great. So just kind of continuing that journey. So thank you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
If I can add, if you don't mind, Larissa, OCIC it's a good network, especially if you're interested in sustainable development and getting involved. We try to make our events and things like this as accessible as we can, usually free or very low cost. So I just say, if you are interested in opportunities in the sector or around it, we also have an opportunities page on our website, and I'll put the link on the chat box. So that's great. That's a great way to know what's going on or what organizations are doing what and how, so that you can reach out. And people, as Larissa said before, in the sector and everywhere really love talking about themselves and are usually really generous with their time. So reach out to people.
And the link is on page 6 to the Opportunities OCIC page. It's a wicked page. I've never actually seen an opportunities page that actually has so many opportunities. So it's a good one.
I check it weekly, if not daily, so thank you.
How about Karen? Are you online still?
Yes, I am. Hi, Larissa. Hi. My question was about any resources or any tips you might have about researching ancestry or family history.
Yeah.
So to add a bit more context around my question, I would self-identify as a racialized person, so I'm of Han Chinese descent. With my parents both speak Portuguese, and they grew up in Portuguese-speaking countries, and so their backgrounds. This is for my dad. This is his 5th continent, and so I'm curious about I'm like understanding more about where I come from, but I also want to like respect confidentiality and privacy too, because I don't want to be coming across as asking for details about, really personal things, but at the same time, part of, my health and well-being is knowing where I come from, like you said. So I was just wondering, with that context in mind, what resources and tips you might have for that.
Yeah. So it's interesting because like in Canada, in terms of like the ancestry, like especially on my Indigenous side, it can be highly politicized, especially as a Métis person. But a starting point that our family used was Ancestry.com in terms of identifying any possible links or any possible document, because like for our citizenship card, you need to actually prove it with government documents. And we have those now. I haven't gone through the application yet, but we have everything we need to go through the application. But yeah, we started with Ancestry.com. And it was, for me, like for our research, like we were actually able to find chapters on our ancestors. We were able to find books written about them. And so it was quite easily identifiable. On my Jamaican side though, like I don't know, like we don't know the name of like my great grandfather, like, and so it's been very hard to find more information about that. So the way that I've been able to understand more about where I come from, without necessarily understanding my exact lineage on my Jamaican side, is understanding the historical context of like how Jamaicans came to be, like how the transatlantic slavery trade brought Africans to Jamaica, how that process, what are the stories coming out of there, really doing research in terms of like Roots, that TV series, even like just like exploring different avenues of history of storytelling in terms of different stories, I guess, different journeys of how my people came to be in Jamaica, because, and again, especially as the further back you go, and if your ancestral line was heavily impacted by colonialism and settlers, you're going to find it's very hard to track past 4 generations, 5 generations even. And so it's the sad reality that many people won't be able to track back too far. But I found that understanding the historical context and understanding stories, not just of my family, but of my people, has helped fill that void that I once felt in terms of not understanding who my direct lineage is. So I guess that's the best answer I could give to that question.
Thank you so much. It definitely offers some insight into looking into the lived experiences of the people.
Yeah.
So thanks, that's very helpful.
Thank you. Oh, I'm glad.
The next person I have on the Q&A is Jukipa.
Oh, hey girl.
If you're still on the line, feel free to post your question.
Hi, yes, I'm definitely still here. I actually have, I don't know, I guess it's a pretty interesting question because I've always wondered how public speakers, I guess, come to be, and how is that established and recognized, or is it self-identified? And that was just like the main, I guess, meat of the question that I have here. And I've been following Larissa's journey for a while. We met like years back in like high school, so I've been following her on Instagram. So I'm just like, wow, how'd you be able to make this I guess career for yourself?
Yeah, and I have to say, you're probably one of like my biggest supporters in terms of speaking stuff. Like you've always been there, so thank you. And honestly, it came from exactly what Jakipa does. She goes to everything internationally. She is always on the go in terms of going to different conferences, meeting different people, and that's exactly how I started. I started attending, again, every single month, something new, at least one, if not 2, conferences, events, forums, whatever it is. And the more I started watching professional public speakers, the more I started to understand, I don't like what they did. Ooh, I really liked what they did. And I started to develop my own sense of how I would want to be as a public speaker. and then gaining more knowledge in terms of my expertise and my research, in terms of overcoming different adversities, I was really developing this passion to share my story, to share my knowledge, because I really felt like as a youth, as someone younger than I was, as someone in the positions that I've been, if I had only had someone tell me the things that I know now, and to have that coming from someone who looked like me, who had similar experiences as me, would have been so profound. Because I had gone through the first time I had a Black mentor was in my 5th year of university. I'd never had a Black professor, a Black teacher until my 5th year of university. And so like just thinking of things like that, and thinking of like, I never saw someone who looked like me speak at my high school or speak when I was in high school. Like I never saw that. So thinking about that, that really brought me to the decision that I really want to be doing this, and I really want to be passing on this information, this mentorship that's been given to me to other people. So when I made that decision, I started pursuing public speaking more seriously. And so I get invited, I apply for a few little things. But it was actually when I made my website, and the link is in the manual, but it was when I made my website that my requests literally tripled overnight. Because when people are looking for public speakers, they have to bring it back to a committee. They have to say, oh, I think this would be a really good speaker. So if they have access to your bio, links to your videos, what you like to speak on, what you have spoken on, what are other events that you're speaking on, when they're able to show that to a committee, when they're able to say that, look, I want to bring in this speaker, when they're able to do that, it's a really easy yes. And if you don't have necessarily those resources or that experience, you can just start calling yourself, I'm a public speaker. And then showing and then displaying, this is what I'd like to speak on, and this is the experience that makes me qualified to speak on this. And so maybe you haven't spoken on it, but you've done a lot of research. Maybe you haven't really spoken on it, but you've done a lot of this, this, and this. And then in terms of training, like looking at, are there any public speaking courses or training that I could do? It could even be online certificates. LinkedIn has a couple of them. And even just adding a few of those to, on paper, say, look, like I've done the work in terms of training for public speaking. But then also including, like, as you're attending, and this is what I started doing when I had less experience in terms of speaking, was I looked at all the places that I was a delegate of. And so I'd be able to list that under experience, this conference, delegate, this conference, delegate. Because even that demonstrates an interest, it demonstrates skill building. And so those are really good opportunities and really good ways to frame experience that maybe it's not directly related to public speaking, but that that could be reflected in public speaking. And then also always doing a scan for calls for papers and calls for proposals, because a lot of conferences will do that a couple months in advance, several months in advance of the event. And that's when you can really propose maybe a research paper that you've written, or you can quickly write one up, and then submitting that. And what I really loved about public speaking and training is that it's offered me the flexibility to do what I love and to do it when I can, and then to travel. Like I'm traveling internationally now for it. And it's really been building off of the networking. So like the tips that I offered in networking and like the skills, like I really suggest looking into that, because I'd say 1/3 of my speaking requests come from Instagram. A lot of them, so I'd say another 1/3 comes from my website. But then the other 1/3 comes from literally just knowing people and networking. And the reason I know these people are because I went to these conferences and because I was a delegate at most of these. So I'd say those were like the most easily identifiable steps that I can say I did. Oh yeah, and then branding myself around my passion, and like saying like, I'm doing everything I can to support these communities. I'm doing everything I can to bring these voices to the table. And when I make that very clear, when I make my purpose and intent very clear, it's easier for someone to identify me as a possible speaker for something. So I'd say that's my answer. I hope that helps.
Yes, thanks. I also think that makes me think of another question. I guess, like, how do you say you're passionate, but like, how do you get that courage to then use that passion to brand yourself? Because sometimes passion can, I don't know, like, be misinformed sometimes. And I want to say that to have that be a little bit more like recognized, we have to establish that, I guess, credibility. And I'm just like wondering, you mentioned a lot of ways that you've done that. So I'm just like, has that empowered you to be that more courageous in yourself and brave?
Yeah, well, and I also, like, I find a lot of power in this, in my passion, because my passion is directly related to my identity, and it's directly related to, again, the people I seek to serve. And like, just for me personally, like, I don't hold much value in terms of my job title, or in terms of in terms of how senior I seem, or any of that. Like, I really place all of my value on what's the impact I'm making, or how is this serving me to better serve others. And so I find that that's where I find a lot of my power. And so I'm able to communicate that. And when you're able to read through like applications and CVs in more detail, I think like I really try to communicate that through how I write, and through framing my lived experience, and drawing very clear connections between my lived experience, my passion, and what I want to do and what I want to speak on. And I think that anyone can do that. If they really think about what they're passionate about, they can draw that back to their lived experience. They can draw that back to different aspects of their identity. It doesn't have to be working within the culture that you were born into, but it could be related to an experience that you had, or an aspect of your identity that makes you more empathetic to the community that you're serving, or that makes you more passionate about that field of work.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all your comments. Great to see you tonight.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, I'm cognizant of time. It is past 8:30, and we're probably all tired, and I'm cognizant of your time, Larissa. We've taken a lot of it. You've spent so much of your time creating these resources for us, and you've been so open. So I think I'm gonna leave it there. If people are curious for more to talk to you, I think they know where to find you. Yeah, so please feel free to contact Larissa, contact us if you have any questions for OCIC. You'll get my contact information, it's online. We're very happy to help you through any piece of this process. And part of that is connecting you with people like Larissa. So thank you so very much again, Larissa, for sharing so much with us, so much of your personal experiences and what's made you be where you are today. And I hope that you see the chat. All of the thank yous and gratitude is coming through there as well from all of our participants today.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for staying on for so long. I didn't expect so many people to stay on. So thanks, you guys.
Thanks so much. Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night, everyone.